The last person I ever expected to share a secret with was my best friend's dad. But here I am, a few months later, still thinking about what happened that night and what he whispered to me when no one else could hear. It started at the end of spring semester. My best friend, Jordan, invited me to spend the first week of summer break at his family's lake house. I didn't even hesitate before saying yes. It had been a hell of a semester. Stress, exams, breakups, I needed out. Jordan and I had been close since high school. Our friendship was easy, comfortable, and full of dumb inside jokes that only made sense to us. I had been to the lake house before, but this time felt different. His mom was away on a yoga retreat, and it was just going to be the three of us, me, Jordan, and his dad, Mr. Carter. Now, Mr. Carter was the kind of dad everyone low-key admired. Early 50s, but you wouldn't guess it. He had that tall, broad-shouldered, silver fox look that made you wonder if he used to model back in the day. He worked in architecture, had that confident, calm voice, and carried himself like someone who was always 2 steps ahead of everyone in the room. I didn't think much of it when we arrived. The house looked just as I remembered it. Big, open, modern, and right on the water. Mr. Carter came out to meet us as we got out of the car, smiling with a cold beer in hand. "Boys," he said, nodding at us. "Good to see you." He gave Jordan a quick clap on the shoulder and then looked at me. "Hey, Luke, glad you could make it." "Thanks for having me," I said, trying not to sound awkward. He held my eye contact just a second too long before turning to grab our bags. The first 2 days were chill. We swam in the lake, grilled burgers, played board games late into the night. Mr. Carter didn't hover. He was cool about giving us space, but every so often I'd catch him watching me, nothing obvious. Just a glance held a second longer than it should have been, and then things shifted. It was the third night. Jordan passed out early after one too many beers and too much sun. I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs for water. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Mr. Carter was still up, sitting out on the deck in a hoodie, nursing a glass of bourbon. I hesitated, then stepped out. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, calm. I shook my head. "Just restless." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit." I did. For a while, we didn't say much, just listened to the crickets and the soft lapping of the lake. Then he said, without turning to me, "Jordan's lucky to have a friend like you." I blinked. Thanks." He took a slow sip of his drink, then turned to look at me, and in the moonlight, his expression was unreadable. "You've grown up a lot. I almost didn't recognize you when you walked up the driveway." I laughed nervously. "It's only been a year." "Still," he said, "you're not a kid anymore." I didn't know what to say to that. There was something in the way he said it that made my skin prickle. Not in a bad way, just intensely. "I ever tell you I used to coach your soccer team back in middle school?" he asked suddenly, shifting the conversation. "No," I said, frowning. "You were the ref that one time, though, when we got crushed 5-0. He smiled, and for a second he looked way younger. "Yeah, you cried after that game," I groaned. "Thanks for bringing that up." He chuckled. "I only remember because you stayed behind after the others left. You sat on the bench, mad at yourself." "I hated losing," I muttered. "I liked that about you," he said. "You had fight." I looked at him, not sure where this was going. Then he leaned in just slightly and added, "Still do." There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for my heart to thump in my chest. Then he said it. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "but you can't tell Jordan, or anyone." I blinked. "Okay." He looked at me, his voice dropping just above a whisper. "I like guys." The words hit me like a wave. Not because they were shocking, but because they explained everything. The glances. The tone. The way he looked at me sometimes, like he saw right through me. Before I could respond, he added, "I've never said that to anyone." And then he asked me, simple, quiet, direct, "Can you keep that a secret?" The silence that followed was heavy, but not awkward. more like the air before a storm. I stared at him, his words still sinking in. I started, then stopped. Yeah, of course. I won't say anything. Mr. Carter's shoulders eased, and for the first time that night, he looked almost vulnerable. The kind of vulnerability you don't expect from someone like him. Confident, put together, the dad who always had the answer. Thank you, he said quietly. He stared at the lake for a moment before adding, You're the first person I've ever told. Not even Jordan's mom knew. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask why he'd chosen me of all people, but another part already knew. Maybe he saw something in me. Maybe he knew I'd understand. I cleared my throat. Does Jordan know? He shook his head. No, and I'd like to keep it that way. He's got his own life, his own worries. This is my thing to figure out. I nodded slowly. I get that. He turned to look at me then, his eyes catching the dim porch light. Do you? I hesitated. The truth was, yeah, I did. I'd known about myself since high school, but only a handful of people knew. Not even Jordan. We'd always been close, but I'd never told him. Something about our friendship made me protective of that part of myself. Yeah, I said finally. I get it. A small smile flickered on his lips. I thought maybe you might. We sat in silence again. I was hyper-aware of the space between us, of how quiet the lake was, how still the house behind us felt. He swirled the bourbon in his glass. You remind me of me at your age, he said softly. Confused, hiding things, thinking nobody would ever understand. That hit a little too close to home. I'm not hiding, I said automatically. He raised an eyebrow. Aren't you? I didn't answer. I see the way you look at people when you think no one's watching, he said gently. It's the same way I used to look, like you're trying to figure out if it's safe to breathe. I stared down at my hands. And is it? He didn't hesitate. Not always, but sometimes. I don't know why, but my chest tightened. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was just hearing someone say out loud what I'd been thinking for years. I'm sorry, he said after a moment. I didn't mean to dump all this on you. You're just a kid. I'm not a kid, I cut in. He looked at me, and something flickered in his eyes. Not pity. Not amusement. Something else. No, he said quietly. You're not. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close we were sitting. His arm rested on the back of my chair, just inches from my shoulder. I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of bourbon and cedar from the deck. I shouldn't be saying this to you, he murmured, more to himself than to me. It's fine, I said, though my voice was quieter than I intended. Really? He leaned back, exhaling. I just needed to tell someone. We sat there, staring out at the dark water. A few moths batted at the porch light. In the distance, a boat engine hummed faintly before fading away. Then he said it, almost under his breath. You're easy to talk to. My pulse quickened. Thanks. I managed. He glanced at me again, and for a heartbeat, our eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between us, and I felt heat crawl up my neck. He broke eye contact first, standing and stretching. It's late, he said. You should get some sleep. Yeah, I said, my voice low. He paused at the doorway, turning back to me. Luke. Yeah? He hesitated. You're not alone, remember that. And then he went inside, leaving me on the deck with my heart pounding in my chest, the night suddenly feeling too big and too quiet. I sat there for a long time, staring at the lake, thinking about what he'd said, about the way he'd looked at me, about the fact that my best friend's dad had just told me something he'd never told anyone before, and about the secret we were now sharing. The next morning, the house felt different. Or maybe it was just me. Jordan was still snoring upstairs, dead to the world after last night's beers. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, trying to shake off the weird cocktail of emotions from the night before. Mr. Carter, Richard, was already up, standing by the stove making coffee. He was in joggers and a fitted t-shirt that clung to his shoulders and arms in a way I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. "Morning," he said, glancing at me over his shoulder. "Morning." I opened the fridge for some juice just to give my hands something to do. "You sleep all right?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes flicking up at me in a way that didn't feel casual at all. "Yeah," I lied. "Deck was nice last night." His mouth quirked into a half smile. "Yeah. It's my favorite spot." We didn't say anything for a minute. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen, and outside the glass doors, the lake shimmered under the early sun. It should have felt normal. It didn't. When he handed me a mug, our fingers brushed. Not a big deal. Not really. But the touch lingered just long enough to make my pulse jump. "Thanks," I said quickly, pulling back. "No problem." He poured his own cup and leaned against the counter, watching me like he was trying to read something in my face. Jordan stumbled in a few minutes later, hair a mess, eyes still half closed. "Coffee," he grunted, and Richard laughed, handing him a mug. Just like that, the tension disappeared, replaced by the easy family vibe I was used to. The day went on like any other. We swam, grilled burgers, messed around on the old canoe. Richard mostly stayed in the background, fixing something on the dock, bringing us towels, being dad. But every so often, I'd catch his eyes on me, and the weight of last night would come rushing back. By early evening, Jordan was getting restless. "Lauren's blowing up my phone," he said, scrolling through his messages. "She's freaking out about some project. I might have to go over there for a couple hours." "You're on vacation," Richard said mildly. "I know, but she's melting down." "I'll be back before midnight," Jordan said, already pulling on a shirt. "You sure you're good here?" he asked me. "Yeah, totally," I said, trying to sound normal. Jordan left a few minutes later. The sound of his car faded up the gravel driveway, and then it was just me and Richard again. I stood at the edge of the deck, watching the sun dip low over the lake. The air was thick and warm, buzzing with the sound of cicadas. "Want to use the sauna?" Richard's voice came from behind me. "It's good after swimming all day." I hesitated. "The sauna." I'd forgotten they even had one until he mentioned it. "Sure," I said, because what else was I supposed to say? He nodded. "I'll fire it up." I followed him down the path to the small cedar building near the boathouse. He opened the door, the earthy scent of wood spilling out, and showed me how to adjust the temperature. "Give it about 10 minutes, he said. "Then it's perfect." I settled on the bench while he stepped back outside. The heat wrapped around me almost instantly, loosening the tension in my shoulders. I closed my eyes, breathing in the sharp cedar smell. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Richard stepped inside, a towel slung low around his hips. "Mind if I join?" he asked, his voice casual. For a second, my mouth went dry. The sauna was small, barely enough room for 2 people. His presence made the air feel even heavier. Sure," I said, shifting to make space. He sat across from me, leaning back against the wall, his towel barely covering him. Sweat was already beading on his chest and arms. I tried to look anywhere but at him, but my eyes kept flicking back, drawn to the way the light and heat softened the hard edges of him. "You look tense," he said after a moment, his voice low and steady. "The sauna's supposed to help with that." "I'm fine," I said, though my heart was hammering. He chuckled quietly. "You don't have to be nervous." "I'm not?" I lied. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "You're safe here, Luke." "I'd never do anything to hurt you." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I know." His eyes held mine for a moment, steady, unreadable. Then, softer. "I meant what I said last night. You're not alone." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. "Thanks," I whispered. The sauna hissed as he poured water onto the rocks, filling the room with a fresh wave of steam. It was suddenly so hot I could feel sweat running down my back. But the heat wasn't the only thing making my pulse race. We sat there in silence, the air between us thick and charged. Then he reached out, his fingers brushing my arm lightly. "You all right?" he asked, his tone soft, almost concerned. I nodded, but the movement felt small. Yeah, just not used to this kind of heat. His hand lingered a second longer before pulling back. A faint smile played on his lips. It's good for you. Clears your head. But mine was anything but clear. The heat of the sauna pressed against me, not just from the stones, but from the tension I could feel radiating from Richard. My heart thumped like a drum I couldn't quiet, every nerve in my body on high alert. I tried to focus on the cedar scent, the warmth, anything but him, but it was impossible. You've grown up a lot since I first met you, he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the steam. I swallowed hard. Yeah, time flies. He leaned back, eyes never leaving mine. It does, and you've changed in ways I can't quite describe. I blinked, unsure how to respond. His tone was intimate, but not threatening. Confusing. Every word seemed loaded, every glance heavier than it should be. Jordan's lucky to have you as a friend, he added quietly. Someone he can trust, someone who actually cares. Thanks, I muttered, my voice barely audible. My pulse was racing, and I could feel the sweat sliding down my back. He reached forward again, just slightly, letting his fingers brush mine on the bench. The contact was light, casual almost, but my body reacted instantly. I jerked back just a fraction, though not enough to break the tension. You don't have to be nervous, he murmured. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know you're safe with me. Okay, I said, trying to steady my voice, though it trembled without me realizing it. He leaned forward a little more, elbows on his knees, the heat of his body so close it felt like it was radiating onto mine. I trust you, he said softly. That's why I told you last night. The words settled between us like a charged current, and I could feel it. The way he wasn't just talking about secrecy, he was talking about something much deeper. You're easy to talk to, he added, almost under his breath. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Thanks. The silence returned, but now it was different. Heavy, expectant, the kind of silence that made the air almost electric. I kept my gaze on the floor, though every instinct told me to look at him. Finally, he stood. The movement was deliberate, slow, careful. I should let you relax. It's late. You probably should get some sleep. I nodded, words caught somewhere in my throat. He paused at the doorway, towel still clinging to his hips, and glanced back. Luke, remember what I said. You're not alone. And then he left. I sat there in the heat, my body buzzing, not just from the sauna, but from the closeness, from the way he'd touched me, the way he'd looked at me. I could still feel the faint brush of his fingers on mine, and I couldn't shake the electricity it left behind. By the time I left the sauna and got back to my room, my mind was spinning. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every glance. He was my friend's dad. He'd asked me to keep a secret, and somehow, I didn't want to forget any of it. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about last night. Every glance, every word Richard had said was looping in my head, louder than the birds outside or the sound of the lake lapping against the dock. I tried to distract myself with swimming, with tossing the football back and forth with Jordan before he left for his emergency project. But it didn't work. Even the sun on my shoulders couldn't compete with the memory of the way Richard's hand had lingered near mine in the sauna. By late afternoon, Jordan had finally left, promising he'd be back after dinner. The house fell into an eerie quiet once his car disappeared down the gravel driveway. Normally, I didn't mind the solitude, but today it felt different, heavier. The walls seemed closer, the rooms smaller, and I knew I wasn't truly alone. I wandered into the kitchen, pretending to get a drink, pretending to do something normal, and there he was. Richard was in the living room, his bare feet planted firmly on the floor, leaning against the arm of the couch with a newspaper in one hand and a glass of bourbon in the other. His tank top clung to his body, the fabric damp from a quick jog around the lake earlier. He looked up, and our eyes met. That same calm intensity from the night before was there, the way he always seemed to see straight into me. My stomach twisted. Hey, I said, trying to sound casual. Hey yourself, he replied, setting his glass down on the coffee table. You keeping busy while Jordan's gone? I nodded, my mind racing. Yeah, Just trying to not be bored. He gave a slow nod, then, without warning, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? I froze. Sure. His gaze held mine. About last night, the sauna. I felt my pulse spike, my cheeks warming. Yeah? I wanted to make sure you didn't feel uncomfortable, he said. I'm careful about boundaries, especially with you. Boundaries? I echoed, heart hammering. I'm fine. Really. He smiled softly, but there was something in his expression I couldn't quite place. Something that made my chest tighten, something that made it almost impossible to focus on anything else. I know you're not a kid, he said, tone low, almost a whisper. But you're young, and I just want to make sure you're okay with all of this. All of this? My voice was quiet, almost too quiet to hear myself. He leaned back slightly, still watching me, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't define. The closeness, the attention. Last night, everything. I don't want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I swallowed hard, the words I wanted to say stuck somewhere in my chest. I'm not uncomfortable, I admitted finally, the confession leaving a shiver through me. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on his lips. You're sure? Yes, I said again, firmer this time, though my voice trembled. I just don't know what to do with this. He chuckled softly, leaning back on the couch and stretching his arms over the backrest. The movement was easy, relaxed, but every inch of him seemed deliberate, drawing me in without saying a word. Neither do I, he admitted. That's why I needed to tell someone. You. Because I trust you. The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. The truth was, I had trusted him too, not like you trust a friend. Not like you trust a casual acquaintance, but like you trust someone who holds part of your world in their hands, someone who knows things about you that nobody else does. I shifted slightly, careful not to seem obvious. Why me? I asked, unable to stop myself. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees again. Because you get it. Because you understand boundaries, even when they're blurry. And because I've seen how you carry yourself, how you respect people, I know you'd never take advantage of me or the situation. I felt my throat tighten. The words, the way he looked at me, the way the sunlight glinted off the silver streaks in his hair, it all combined into a pressure I couldn't ignore. Luke, he said softly, using my name like it was a bridge across the tension building between us. I need to ask you something else, something I haven't asked anyone before. And you can say no, you can say anything, but I need you to be honest. I nodded, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Okay. He took a deep breath. Do you want this? His voice was low, deliberate, and for a second I didn't understand what he meant. This? I echoed, the single word trembling. He leaned closer, just enough that I could feel the heat from his body, the faint scent of his cologne, mixing with the clean cedar smell from the deck sliding in through the open door. Yes, us, tonight, while Jordan's away, this secret, between us. Do you want it, Luke? I didn't answer right away. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of warning bells and desire, of impossibility and temptation. And then, slowly, one truth pushed through everything else. Yes, I whispered. His eyes flickered, and a small, almost shy smile tugged at his lips. Good, he said, soft, almost reverent. Because I want this too. And just like that, the rules we'd both silently respected were gone. The line between friend, son, and desire blurred into something forbidden, something dangerous, and I knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever feel the same again. We spent the next few hours talking, just quietly at first, testing boundaries, our conversation punctuated by shared glances, small touches, and an unspoken agreement that what happened here stayed here. By the time the sun disappeared completely behind the lake, The tension had shifted. It wasn't just words anymore. It was closeness. It was electricity. It was a secret being carved into our world, one moment at a time. I knew that tomorrow we'd face the same house, the same lake, the same porch. But now, every glance, every word, every brush of skin carried weight, and I couldn't wait. The house was quiet that evening. Jordan had left hours earlier, and I could feel the emptiness press against the walls, making every sound, every creak of the old floorboards, every distant splash of the lake seem amplified. I sat in the living room, absently flipping through a magazine I wasn't reading. My thoughts inevitably drifted to Richard, to the way he'd looked at me earlier, the way his words had brushed against me like an electric current I didn't know how to handle. I wasn't sure when he slipped into the room. One second I was alone. The next, there he was, standing in the doorway, towel still hanging low at his hips from a quick rinse after jogging. My chest tightened. The sight of him made my pulse jump in a way that felt impossible to control. I swallowed, trying to force my hands to stop shaking. "Still awake?" he asked, his voice low, casual, but something in the way he said it made the air between us feel charged. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep," I admitted, looking down at my hands. He took a step closer, and for the first time, the distance between us felt too small. He leaned against the armrest of the couch beside me, the faint scent of cedar and his aftershave filling my nose. "I thought you might be awake," he said, and there was a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability almost. Something raw, hidden beneath the confidence he always wore like armor. I could only nod, my throat suddenly dry. He studied me for a moment, just looking, the way someone might look at a painting they didn't want to ruin by touching. Then he spoke again, quietly, deliberately. "About earlier in the sauna, I felt heat crawl up my neck." "Yeah? I wanted to make sure you were comfortable, that you weren't feeling trapped or pressured." His words were careful, precise, but the subtle tremor in his voice betrayed something deeper. "I'm fine," I whispered, though my hands betrayed me, trembling slightly as I gripped the edge of the couch. "Really?" He leaned closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Just proximity, nothing else yet, and I was already aware of every nerve ending in my skin. "I trust you, Luke," he said softly. "That's why I told you last night, and that's why I'm here now. I need you to know I'd never cross a line you didn't want me to cross." My pulse thundered in my ears. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between us, but the words stuck somewhere deep inside. "Good," he murmured, almost under his breath. "Because I want this too." The weight of that statement lingered between us, heavier than the humid evening air. I tried to focus on the magazine again, tried to will my pulse to slow, but my eyes kept flicking to him, to the way his jaw flexed as he spoke, to the curve of his shoulders under the thin fabric of his t-shirt, to the way his eyes seemed to pierce straight through me. And then, suddenly, he reached out. Just a brush at first, his fingertips against mine, light, tentative. The contact was so small, so simple, yet it made my entire body tense, every nerve screaming. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. It was like an unspoken agreement forming in that simple touch. The secret was mutual. He let his hand linger for a moment longer, brushing the back of my hand softly. "You're not uncomfortable?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No, I'm not," I managed to say, though my voice quivered. He smiled faintly, that small, knowing smile that made my chest tighten unbearably. "Good, because neither am I." The rest of the room seemed to shrink, as though the walls themselves were leaning closer, urging us together. He leaned back slightly, but the heat of his body still pressed against the couch where I sat. Our eyes met again, and I felt the tiniest brush of guilt and excitement slide over me. This was wrong, absolutely wrong. But the pull between us was undeniable, magnetic. "Luke," he said, his voice soft, low. He shifted slightly closer, the proximity more than accidental. "I know this is complicated, but I need to know, do you want this?" My heart hammered in my chest. I don't know," I admitted honestly, even as my body ached to say yes. I've never been in a situation like this before. He nodded, a faint flicker of relief crossing his features. Neither have I, he whispered. But we don't have to rush anything. Just honesty. That's all I need. The room was silent again, but the silence was heavy, suffocating, yet exhilarating. Every breath seemed louder, every heartbeat more pronounced. I could feel the warmth of his body, even when he leaned back slightly, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the cedar and the summer night air. And then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted closer again, this time a fraction of an inch, enough that our knees brushed, enough to make my stomach twist into knots. My pulse raced, my hands felt clammy, and I realized I was holding my breath without knowing it. You're safe, he murmured again, softer this time, almost a caress. I won't do anything you don't want. I know, I whispered. The tension hung between us, electric, palpable, charged with unspoken desire and mutual understanding. Neither of us moved for a long, stretched-out moment. It was just us, the empty house, the distant sound of the lake, and the quiet knowledge of a secret being shared. And then, slowly, carefully, he reached for my hand again, this time with intention, holding it just long enough that I could feel the heat of his skin, the firmness of his grip, the weight of the secret between us. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. And as our eyes locked, the realization hit me. This was only the beginning. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors settling in the evening heat. Jordan was still gone, and I could hear the faint lapping of the lake against the dock outside. Every little noise felt magnified in the quiet, every shadow heavier. I had tried to focus on something mundane, my phone, a book, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Richard, back to the sauna, back to the soft brush of his fingers, the intensity in his eyes, the weight of the secret we now shared. He hadn't spoken much since the moment he took my hand again. He had simply leaned back slightly, letting the touch linger, letting the silence stretch between us in a way that felt more intimate than any words could have. I was hyper-aware of every inch of him. How the t-shirt clung to the broad planes of his chest and shoulders, the way the dim light hid his jawline, and the subtle rhythm of his breathing. My own body hummed with tension, a mixture of nerves, curiosity, and something deeper I wasn't ready to name. Luke, he murmured softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, and he was watching me with that same intensity that had been there in the sauna, only closer now, more personal. I need to know something. What? My voice was quieter than I intended, brittle. Do you want me to stop? He asked, his tone gentle but charged with anticipation. I don't want to push you, not if you're unsure. I shook my head quickly, though my throat felt dry. No. I don't want you to stop, I admitted, almost a breathless whisper. The words felt reckless, but honest, more honest than anything I'd said to anyone in a long time. His expression softened, a flicker of relief crossing his features, and then that careful, deliberate smile returned. Good, he said, low and measured, because I don't plan on stopping. He shifted slightly on the couch, and the heat from his body brushed against mine. It wasn't aggressive, just proximity, just the suggestion of something more. My pulse quickened, and I became acutely aware of every inch of him, the strength in his arms, the warmth radiating from his skin, the subtle scent that was unmistakably him. I felt my own body respond, an undeniable flutter of awareness that made me acutely conscious of my own heart hammering in my chest. Can I? He began, then hesitated, swallowing audibly. Can I kiss you? My stomach flipped. The question was so direct, so loaded, yet careful, cautious. I swallowed, my throat dry, and nodded. Yes. He leaned in slowly, every movement deliberate, giving me space, letting me pull away if I wanted to. But I didn't. Our lips met in a tentative, almost gentle kiss at first, testing boundaries, measuring reactions. It was nothing like the movies. It was real, messy, hesitant. The warmth of him pressed against me, his hand brushing my arm lightly as if to reassure me, and I felt a shiver run through my spine. The kiss deepened gradually, growing more confident, more intentional, and I found myself leaning in, responding to the subtle pressure of his lips. It was electrifying and terrifying at the same time, wrong yet undeniably right in that moment. My hands shook slightly as I reached out, touching his arm, feeling the taut muscle beneath his skin. He pulled back just enough to look at me, searching my face for hesitation, for regret. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, even though my chest was tight and my pulse felt like it was threatening to escape. "Yeah," I whispered, barely able to breathe. I'm okay." A small, almost imperceptible smile curved his lips. "Good," he said, and then kissed me again. This time, the kiss was firmer, more deliberate. Our lips moved together in a careful rhythm, exploring, testing, learning the contours of each other. The couch beneath us felt suddenly small, the air thick with heat and anticipation. I felt his hand on my shoulder, sliding slowly down my arm, light touches that sent sparks up my nerves. Each brush made my heart race faster, each contact a reminder of the secrecy, of the danger, of the impossibility of what we were doing. And yet, it was intoxicating. I couldn't stop myself from leaning closer, from letting my body respond in ways I hadn't expected. We broke apart briefly, both of us breathing hard, eyes locked. "Luke," he whispered, his voice low, almost reverent. "I shouldn't be doing this," I shook my head. "I don't care," I admitted, my own voice trembling. I want this too." A flicker of relief and something darker, something more intense, crossed his face. He leaned in again, pressing his lips to mine with a tenderness that belied the intensity simmering beneath the surface. This time, the kiss deepened more quickly, urgent but controlled, a careful dance between desire and restraint. My hands moved to his chest, feeling the warmth beneath the fabric, the subtle strength that made my breath hitch. Every movement was deliberate, careful, nothing reckless, nothing violent, just closeness, intimacy, exploration within boundaries that only we knew existed. Each brush of skin, each flicker of fingers, each gentle press was a confirmation of trust, of understanding, of a secret being built between us, brick by brick. Eventually, we leaned back slightly, foreheads resting against each other. The heat of the room, the intensity of our shared gaze, the knowledge that Jordan would never know, made everything feel suspended in a bubble of impossibility. "I trust you," he murmured again, his voice softer this time, almost tender. "And I trust you," I whispered back, heart hammering. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, sometimes talking in whispers, sometimes just breathing, just feeling the weight of our shared secret, the closeness that had grown from a casual touch to something undeniably intimate. The knowledge of the line we had crossed, and were willing to explore, hung between us, fragile but electrifying. By the time we finally parted, both of us shaky and flushed, there was no going back. Every glance, every word, every touch would now carry that weight. And I knew, deep down, that the secret we shared wasn't just about desire. It was about trust, about understanding, and about something neither of us could ever admit out loud. Not to anyone, and certainly not to Jordan. The following morning, I woke with a strange mixture of exhilaration and guilt. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the floor, and the lake outside shimmered like it always did. But somehow, everything felt different. Even the familiar sound of birds calling seemed sharper, as though it carried the echo of the previous night's secret. I lay in bed for a long moment, thinking about Richard, about the kiss, about the way our hands had lingered together, and the electricity that pulsed through me whenever I remembered the small, careful touches. I couldn't get him out of my head. Every thought, every glance I'd ever shared with him seemed to replay with new weight, new meaning. And worse, I knew that Jordan was blissfully unaware, completely innocent in this secret we now held between us. The knowledge pressed against me in a way that made it difficult to breathe, yet thrillingly exhilarating. By the time I rolled out of bed, showered, and dressed, the house was silent. Jordan hadn't returned yet, and Richard was nowhere in sight. I wandered down to the living room, trying to act casual, but the tension in my body refused to dissipate. It wasn't just nerves or guilt. It was anticipation. The kind of anticipation that comes from knowing someone is watching you, someone knows your secret and cherishes it, and you can't stop thinking about that. I poured myself a glass of juice and settled on the couch, absently scrolling through my phone, though my eyes kept flicking toward the doorway, expecting him to appear at any moment. My pulse quickened when I heard the faint creak of floorboards above, followed by the soft shuffle of footsteps on the stairs. He appeared at the top of the steps, still in his joggers, the same easy confidence in his posture that always made me catch my breath. "Morning?" he said casually, though the heat in his tone gave away that last night wasn't just a dream. "Morning?" I replied, my voice quieter than I intended, betraying the flutter of nerves I couldn't hide. He descended the stairs and sat beside me on the couch, close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly. The contact was subtle, but it made every nerve in my body tingle. He poured himself some coffee from the French press, the rich aroma filling the room. "You slept?" he asked casually, though his eyes lingered on me, studying me. Yeah," I said. "Mostly? You?" "About the same," he murmured, taking a slow sip. He set the mug down carefully and leaned back slightly, his gaze still on me. "Last night, I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable." "No," I said immediately, even though my heart was still racing. It was okay. More than okay, actually." My voice faltered on the last word, and I looked down at my hands, unable to meet his eyes. He reached out, resting a hand lightly over mine. "I'm glad," he said, voice soft, almost reverent. The warmth of his touch made my pulse jump. It was subtle, a brush of skin, yet it carried a promise, an unspoken acknowledgement of what we had shared. We sat in silence for a few moments, the quiet punctuated only by the distant sound of the lake and the faint hum of the ceiling fan. The intimacy from the night before hung between us like a tangible force, binding us together in a delicate balance of secrecy and desire. Every glance, every touch, every word felt loaded now. Even casual movements carried weight. "Luke," he murmured after a moment, leaning slightly closer, his voice low and careful. "Do you want to explore this? I mean, tonight?" My chest tightened. The thought had crossed my mind countless times since the sauna, since the kiss. The answer was already written in the way my body reacted to him, in the heat that flared every time he touched me, in the anticipation that had me almost shaking. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I want this." He smiled, slow and deliberate, and the faint flicker in his eyes told me he was relieved, that he had been wondering if I truly felt the same. "Good," he said softly, "because I want this too." We rose from the couch together, moving slowly, deliberately, testing boundaries as we navigated the small space of the living room. Every step, every slight brush of skin against skin made my heart race. The house was empty, the air thick with tension and desire. Jordan was still away, unaware that every move we made was a careful dance, a secret being crafted in the spaces between us. Richard led me to the small study, a room I had never noticed before, tucked behind a set of double doors. The space was intimate, filled with the scent of old books and polished wood. He closed the door behind us, and suddenly the world outside ceased to exist. There was only him, me, and the unspoken understanding that everything happening now was ours alone. He stepped closer, the heat from his body pressing against mine, deliberate, but gentle. "I want you to know," he murmured, his lips hovering near my ear, "that you don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But I want you to be honest with me, with yourself, and with me." I nodded, swallowing hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. "I am," I whispered. "I want this with you." A faint smile curved his lips, and then he kissed me. Slow, careful, deliberate at first, letting me pull away if I wanted. But I didn't. My body responded before my mind could protest. Every brush of his lips, every press of his hand against mine, every whisper of his breath was a confirmation of the secret we shared, a secret that made everything feel impossibly thrilling and terrifying at once. The kiss deepened gradually, building from tentative exploration to something more urgent, more deliberate. His hand moved from mine, tracing lightly up my arm. over my shoulder, subtle enough not to alarm, intentional enough to make every nerve in my body light on fire. My own hands explored cautiously, tracing the lines of his torso through the thin fabric of his shirt, feeling the warmth beneath, the strength, the closeness that I had craved since the sauna. We broke apart only for breath, foreheads resting together, both of us breathing hard. "Luke," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. "We need to be careful." "Jordan." "I know," I said, my own voice soft. "I'll keep it a secret. I want to." A small, almost shy smile flickered across his face. "Good," he said, pressing his forehead to mine again. "Because what we're doing, it's ours, only ours, and it has to stay that way." And as we sat there, tangled in the weight of our secret, I realized that the boundary we had crossed wasn't just about desire. It was about trust, about vulnerability, about a connection so forbidden, so impossible, that it made every touch, every look, every whispered word feel electric. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't turn back. The house had fallen into a heavy silence after dinner. Jordan was still out, the gravel crunch of his car fading hours ago, leaving the air between Richard and me thick with anticipation. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the distant lap of the lake against the dock, felt amplified, each one a reminder that we were alone and entirely untethered from the outside world. Richard leaned back in the armchair, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He looked at me across the room, and I felt my chest tighten instantly. The memory of our sauna moment, our hands brushing, the kiss lingering on my lips, all rushed back with a pulse so strong it made my knees weak. "Luke," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "You still with me?" I nodded quickly, though I wasn't entirely sure what he meant. My mind had been spinning for hours, replaying the last few nights over and over. "Yeah," I whispered. He set the glass down on the side table, and I could see the faint flicker of emotion in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, desire, hesitation. And yet, beneath all that, an undeniable confidence, a steady certainty that he knew exactly what he wanted. "Come here," he murmured, patting the space beside him. I moved closer, every step deliberate, aware of how close we already were. The air felt warmer, thicker, charged with tension. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine, and I felt the same electricity from the sauna course through me again. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just desire. It was the acknowledgement of a secret, a shared understanding, a bond that no one else could ever touch or know. "Luke," he murmured again, voice barely audible. "You know this can't go beyond these walls, right?" I swallowed, nodding. "I know. I want it to stay like this." A faint smile tugged at his lips, just enough to let me see the relief in his expression. "Good," he said softly, and then he leaned in, pressing his lips to mine once more. This kiss was different from the first. It wasn't tentative, it wasn't testing boundaries. It was intentional, deliberate, a slow and careful exploration. Every touch, every brush of lips, every shift of his body against mine sent sparks shooting through me. I leaned in, letting my hands rest on his chest, feeling the warmth beneath the fabric of his shirt, the subtle tension of his muscles. His hand moved from mine to the back of my neck, gentle, guiding, as if he was as uncertain as he was sure of himself. The kiss deepened, a slow and steady press, building tension that was almost unbearable. My body reacted instinctively, leaning into him, every nerve alight, every breath shallow. Finally, we broke apart for air, foreheads resting together, our breaths mingling. "Luke," he murmured, his lips brushing against mine even in the pause. "We need to be careful. This is forbidden, dangerous." "I know," I whispered, my own voice trembling. "And that's why it matters. I want this. I want you." His eyes softened, a flicker of something almost tender, and he nodded. "Good," he said quietly, "because I want this too, but we do it carefully." Slowly, he shifted slightly, the heat of his body pressing against mine in a way that was subtle, yet every nerve in me flared. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest against my own, the faint warmth of his arm brushing along my side, the deliberate weight of his hand resting lightly on my thigh. Every movement, every touch, was a confirmation of trust. We explored the closeness cautiously, lingering on each contact, letting the tension build without rushing it. His hands traced over mine, over my arms, lightly pressing into the contours of my shoulders. Every brush sent shivers down my spine, every gentle touch, a reminder of the intimacy we were cultivating. "I've never," he murmured against my ear, his breath warm, "felt this way with anyone. Not like this." "Me neither," I admitted, feeling the heat crawl up my neck. "It's intense, dangerous, but I can't stop thinking about it." He chuckled softly, a low, intimate sound. "Good," he whispered, pressing his forehead against mine, because I don't want it to stop either. "But we take our time, yeah? No rushing. We explore slowly." And we did. Slowly. Every touch, every glance, every subtle brush of skin was deliberate. Deliberate. A careful testing of boundaries. The intensity built, not from haste, but from restraint. From knowing that each moment, each shared secret, was something forbidden and precious. A connection that nobody else could ever touch. Hours passed in this careful intimacy, the room alive with the quiet heat of desire and the deeper, unspoken bond forming between us. It was a dance of trust, vulnerability, and temptation, each movement measured, each touch meaningful. My chest ached from the intensity, my pulse raced, yet I felt grounded in a way I had never experienced before. By the time we finally parted, both of us trembling slightly, flushed and breathless, the gravity of what we'd shared hung between us. Every glance, every word, every touch from that night had changed something fundamental. A secret had been formed, a secret we both guarded and craved, a forbidden intimacy that would define the summer and perhaps far beyond. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my body still humming from the closeness, I realized that the secret was no longer just about desire, it was about trust. About connection. About something neither of us could ever speak aloud. And I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The next morning, the lake sparkled under the early summer sun, but the light couldn't compete with the awareness buzzing in my chest. Every shadow in the house, every movement of the blinds, every faint creak of the floorboards reminded me of the secret Richard and I now shared. It was heavy, but thrilling. Dangerous, but ours. Jordan was still asleep in his room, the faint sound of his breathing carried across the hall. I stayed in bed a few extra minutes, letting the memories of the night linger, how Richard's hand had held mine, the warmth of his body pressing against me, the careful, deliberate way he had guided me through something forbidden. My pulse still raced, my body still hummed, but beneath the excitement, a quiet sense of something more significant had settled in. Trust. Eventually, I got up, showered, and wandered down to the kitchen, pretending to be normal, but unable to hide the way my hands shook slightly. And then I saw him. Richard, standing at the counter, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly damp from an early jog. He looked ordinary, but in my mind, there was nothing ordinary about him. Not anymore. He glanced at me, and I felt my stomach flip. There was a softness in his gaze now, something almost tender. "Morning," he said, voice casual, but I could feel the subtle weight in it. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. But I couldn't stop the awareness that every inch of him, the curve of his shoulders, the ease of his stance, the depth of his gaze, was impossible to ignore. He poured a cup of coffee, and then, almost cautiously, he stepped closer. "How are you feeling?" I hesitated. How did one explain the swirl of exhilaration, nervousness, and something deeper, something impossible, to the man who had changed everything overnight? I swallowed. "Good," I said finally. I think I needed that." He nodded slowly, eyes studying me like he always did. "Good, because I wanted to be sure that you're okay, that you weren't overwhelmed." "I'm okay," I said, voice firmer now, though my heart still thumped. It was more than I expected, but I'm okay. He let out a quiet laugh, soft and almost relieved. I wasn't sure either, he admitted. I haven't done anything like that in years. Our eyes met, and there was a flicker of understanding. The kind of understanding that only comes from sharing something forbidden, something dangerous, something intimate. The weight of the secret between us was palpable, and yet, in that moment, it made the world feel smaller, more focused, more alive. We moved to the deck together, carrying our coffee. The sunlight glinted off the lake, but all I could focus on was him. The ease of his posture, the calm in his voice, the warmth in his eyes. Every step, every shared silence carried the quiet charge of our secret, the subtle brush of skin, the unspoken promise lingering between us. We sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling above the water. Neither of us spoke much, because words felt almost unnecessary. The closeness, the secret, the intimacy of what we had shared hung between us like a tangible thread. You know, he said softly, breaking the silence, this doesn't have to change anything with Jordan. We keep it quiet, we keep it safe. But he hesitated, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. I'm glad I told you. I trust you. And I hope you trust me too. I nodded, swallowing hard. I do, I said. Completely. He smiled then, a slow, soft curve of his lips, and for a moment the world felt suspended. Good, he murmured, because that trust, it's rare. And it's important. What we have, it's special. And we protect it. Always. I realized then that the secret wasn't just about desire or forbidden closeness. It was about something deeper. It was about understanding, about trust, about connection, about the unspoken promise that neither of us would betray the fragile, electric bond we had formed. We stayed there for hours, watching the lake, talking in whispers, letting the silence between our words speak volumes. There were no hurried movements, no reckless impulses, just the slow, deliberate building of intimacy and the quiet thrill of knowing that our secret was ours alone. By the time Jordan returned that evening, laughing and chattering about his day, Richard and I had shifted back to ordinary smiles, casual conversation, the unspoken tension tucked neatly beneath layers of normalcy. The secret was alive, humming quietly between us, a current we both understood but would never speak aloud. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that some secrets aren't just about danger or desire. They're about trust, about knowing that someone sees you in a way nobody else does, about being allowed to explore something forbidden, safely, deliberately, with someone who understands every pulse, every glance, every nerve. And I knew, without a doubt, that the bond Richard and I shared would stay with me forever. An unspoken promise, a dangerous thrill, and the kind of connection I had never experienced before. A secret we'd keep, always.